The whispering fear. Deep in the heart of the African wilderness, nestled between rolling green hills and ancient baobab trees, lay the village of Oritu. It was a place of peace, where the people lived simple lives, untouched by the modern world. The villagers farmed the rich soil, fetched water from the crystal-clear river, and gathered under the moonlight to share stories passed down through generations. But peace was a fragile thing. And lately, fear had settled over Oritu like a heavy fog. The shadow over the village. For months, something terrible had been happening. Women were disappearing. Not all at once. Not in the open. But one by one, young women, bright, full of life, would go missing in the dead of night. And in the mornings, their bodies would be found near the village square. Cold. Pale. Lifeless. The villagers gathered each time, whispering among themselves, eyes filled with terror. No one had seen or heard anything. There was no struggle, no signs of an attack, just the bodies, always left in the same manner. And the most chilling part. Each victim bore 2 small puncture marks on their necks. They looked like snake bites. But there were no signs of venom. No swelling, no sickness, just death, swift and silent. At first, the people believed it to be the work of a wild beast or an unseen spirit. But then, the deaths became more frequent. And always, it was the most beautiful women in the village who were taken. The village chief, Chief Mosi, a man of great wisdom and strength, could not ignore it any longer. This must end, he declared, standing before the people in the village square. His deep voice carried over the crowd, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. The villagers begged him for protection, for answers. So, Chief Mosi sent out his best hunters, warriors trained to track anything, man or beast. They scoured the land, searching the forest and hills, looking for signs of the killer. But they found nothing. No footprints. No trails. No answers. And as the days passed, the fear in Oritu only grew stronger. Django, the man no one suspected. While the rest of the village lived in fear, there was one man who seemed untouched by it all. His name was Django. If you asked anyone in Oritu who the most handsome man was, the answer was always Django. Tall and strong, his skin was as smooth as polished ebony. His hair was thick and coiled, his jawline sharp, his smile dangerous. His eyes, dark and knowing, held secrets that no one could read. He was the kind of man who could make women forget their worries with just a glance. And he knew it. Django walked through the village with an air of confidence, never seeming troubled by the fear that gripped everyone else. While mothers held their daughters close and men whispered of dangers in the night, Django laughed. He lived his life as if the disappearances were nothing more than a passing storm. The women of Oritu were drawn to him like moths to a flame. Even in their fear, they found comfort in his presence. If Django was around, surely nothing bad could happen. Or so they believed. The last moments of the lost. One thing became clear, each woman who disappeared had been seen with Django the night before. At the village well, in the marketplace, at the evening gatherings beneath the baobab tree, they would be with him. Smiling. Laughing. Hypnotized by his voice, his touch, his charm. And then, by morning, they would be gone. Yet, no one ever suspected Django. Not him. He was too perfect, too harmless. Instead, the village searched for other explanations. They spoke of curses, vengeful spirits, demons of the night. But never Django. Never the man whose smile held the power to make women forget their fears. The chief's growing suspicion. But Chief Mosi was no fool. He had watched the pattern closely. He had seen the way the women disappeared after spending time with Django. And though he had no proof, his instincts whispered to him. Django is not what he seems. So, one night, Chief Mosi made a decision. He gathered 3 of his finest warriors and ordered them to keep watch over the village in secret. If the killer moves in the night, we will see him, Mosi declared. No more shadows. No more whispers. We will learn the truth. A dangerous night begins. The warriors took their positions, hidden among the trees and rooftops, their eyes sharp as eagles. The village fell into silence, people retreating into their homes, their doors bolted shut. But Django moved freely, just as he always did. And that night, under the full moon, he was not alone. A young woman, Lina, one of the village's most beautiful maidens, walked beside him. She smiled as he whispered into her ear, her eyes full of trust. The warriors watched as Django led her away, toward his hut at the edge of the village. They gripped their weapons. Ready. They would follow him. And tonight, they would learn the truth, the man they all desired. The village of Oritu had known many great men, warriors, hunters, and elders whose wisdom guided their people. But none of them held the power that Django did. His power was not one of battle or strength, nor one of leadership. It was something else entirely. It was the way he walked, a slow, measured grace that made it seem like he was floating. It was the way he spoke, his voice deep, rich, and smooth like honey dripping from a tree. It was the way he smiled, like he knew a secret the rest of the world would never understand. Django was a man unlike any other. And the women of Oritu could not resist him. A man above all others. When Django entered the village square, the world shifted around him. Men stood taller, adjusting their posture, trying to mirror his confidence. Women blushed, their hands trembling as they carried baskets of fruit or fetched water. Even those who tried to ignore him failed, his very presence commanded attention. There was something unsettling about his beauty. His dark skin glowed under the sun, his eyes gleamed like polished onyx. His smile was a weapon, his words were music, and his touch, whenever he laid it upon a woman's hand, felt like fire. And yet, despite the fear that gripped Oritu, despite the whispers of the dead women, the warnings from elders and worried mothers, women still came to him. They could not help themselves. Even knowing the risks, they sought his company, lured by something they could not explain. And Django? He welcomed them all. A pattern of disappearances. Django never rushed. He was a patient hunter. He didn't need to chase or beg. He simply waited, and the women came to him. A glance across the market. A touch of his fingers at the river. A whisper in the cool night air. Once he had them, they followed him willingly, drawn into his world as if under a spell. And once they stepped inside his hut, they never returned. The fear grows. The disappearances became too frequent to ignore. 1 woman. Then 2. Then 5. Always the most beautiful, always the most admired. The village's fear grew, but no one spoke Django's name. Not openly. Not yet. The chief watched him, the elders whispered about him. But Django was too powerful. Accusing a man like him without proof would be dangerous. Because Django was not just admired, he was worshipped. And worship can blind people from the truth. The young hunter's suspicion. Not everyone was blinded. A young hunter named Simba had been watching Django for some time. Unlike the others, he did not trust the man's charm. Simba was observant, skilled in tracking the movements of animals, in noticing details others overlooked. And one day, he realized something odd about Django. He did not age. Simba had grown up in Oritu, and ever since he was a boy, Django had always looked the same. Years had passed, elders grew older, children became men, but Django remained untouched by time. His skin did not wrinkle. His voice did not waver. His eyes held no years behind them. It was impossible. And yet, no one questioned it. Until now. Simba told the chief what he had noticed, but Chief Mosi only nodded solemnly. I have been watching him too, the chief admitted. But we need more than suspicion. Simba agreed. And so, he decided to watch Django more closely. The arrival of Naima. On the evening of the next full moon, a new face arrived in Oritu. Her name was Naima. She came on foot, carrying a basket of herbs on her head, her posture graceful and proud. Her beauty was unlike any woman in the village. Her skin was the color of rich mahogany, her eyes sharp and piercing. Her hair, braided and adorned with tiny shells, cascaded over her shoulders. She did not walk, she commanded the ground beneath her. And for the first time in his life, Django felt something strange. He watched her from afar, intrigued. Most women, upon seeing him, would blush, look away, or giggle nervously. But Naima did none of these things. She did not avert her gaze. She did not stumble over her words. She did not smile when he walked past. Instead, she looked him straight in the eyes, her expression unreadable. Django was not used to this. Women always fell for him. But Naima was different. And Django was not a man who liked to be ignored. The woman who would not fall. That night, as the villagers gathered around the fire, telling stories and sharing food, Django approached Naima. He sat beside her, his presence looming like a shadow. You are new to Oritu, he said, his voice as smooth as flowing water. Naima glanced at him. Yes. Django smiled, waiting for the usual reaction, the blush, the nervous look, the stolen glance. But Naima remained unaffected. Django's smile faltered for just a moment. You have come far, he said, his voice lower. You must be tired. Naima only nodded. Still, no blush. No giggle. Django's fingers twitched. For the first time in years, he felt challenged. And Django was not a man who accepted challenges lightly. The hunter becomes the hunted. From the shadows, Simba watched. He had seen many women fall under Django's spell. But Naima, she was different. Simba felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Naima was the one who could unravel Django's secrets. Maybe she was the one who could bring the truth to light. But Simba also knew one thing for certain. Django would not let her go so easily. The stranger with a purpose. Naima arrived in Oritu with a mission. The village knew her only as a traveler, a woman who carried herself with quiet strength, but she had not come for trade, nor for rest. She had come for revenge. Her younger sister, Safina, had once lived in a village near Oritu. She was one of the missing women. One day, Safina had spoken in letters about a man with a golden smile, a man who made her heart race. A man named Django. And then, her letters stopped coming. Word of disappearances in Oritu reached Naima. She knew she would find her answers there. And so, she traveled to the village, her heart heavy with grief, her mind focused on one thing. Finding the truth. The man everyone loved, but not her. It didn't take long for Naima to hear Django's name. It was on everyone's lips, always spoken with admiration or longing. Men envied him. Women desired him. But Naima saw past the words of admiration. She watched the pattern, the way the village moved around him. She noticed how every woman he touched eventually vanished. The elders whispered behind closed doors, but no one dared speak aloud. And Django himself. He moved like he owned the air they breathed. He was handsome, there was no denying that. His presence radiated charm, his deep voice like the smooth flow of river water. But Naima, she was not impressed. Not by his voice. Not by his smile. Not by the way he looked at her, waiting for her to fall under his spell like the others. Naima refused to look away when he passed. She did not blush. She did not giggle. She did not fall. And that was the moment Django noticed her. The woman who didn't fear him. From the moment Django first laid eyes on Naima, something inside him shifted. It was not love. Django did not love. It was not admiration. Django did not admire. It was something else. Something deeper. Something darker. For the first time in years, a woman did not melt under his gaze. For the first time, a woman did not seek him out. She ignored his presence. Him. Django. A man to whom women surrendered themselves willingly. A man no woman had ever resisted. And now, this Naima, she acted as if he were nothing. It angered him. It excited him. And suddenly, he wanted her more than any woman before. Django was not used to being denied. And his ego would not allow it. A dangerous game begins. Django changed his approach. Instead of pursuing her, he pulled back. Instead of speaking to her first, he waited for her to come to him. He acted as if he didn't care. But when she walked by, he would watch. When she sat among the villagers, he would listen. The women of Oritu noticed. They whispered. She is different. She does not smile at him. Django watches her like a hunter watches prey. And Naima heard it all. She knew she was being watched. But what Django did not know was that she was watching him, too. The hunt in reverse. Naima was careful. She spoke to the women of Oritu, listening to their stories, their memories. She learned that those who disappeared were last seen with Django. She learned that no one could recall Django ever looking older. She learned that the elders were afraid to even whisper his name after dark. And then, she did something no one had ever done before. She followed him. What she saw in the night. One night, Naima crept through the village, careful to avoid the light of the fires, her footsteps as soft as the wind. She had seen Django leaving the square alone. She had waited until he was far ahead. And then, she followed him. Django walked with ease, his steps confident, his body relaxed. But there was something wrong. Something in the way he moved when no one was watching. Something not human. His silhouette seemed to shift, the shadows around him bending unnaturally. And then, he vanished. Gone. Into the darkness of the trees. Naima's blood ran cold. Because she knew what she had just witnessed. Django was not a man. He was something else. Something evil. The plan to expose him. Naima returned to the village, her heart pounding. She could not confront him yet. Not without proof. Not without a plan. Because Django was no ordinary killer. He was something far worse. And if Naima wanted to survive, if she wanted to avenge her sister, she would have to trap him before he trapped her. She would have to let him believe that he had won. Because Django was the hunter. But he did not yet realize that this time, he was the one being hunted. The trap is set. The shift in the game. For weeks, Django had pursued Naima in silence. Not with words, not with smiles, not with the usual charm that had entranced every woman before her. No. This time, he waited. He let her come to him. And Naima, knowing exactly what he was doing, played along. She let him believe that his absence had unsettled her. She let him think that his silence had drawn her in. Django's ego was too big to consider the truth. That Naima had already figured out what he was. And she was waiting for the right moment to strike. The invitation. One evening, as the village prepared for nightfall, Django approached Naima. His presence was like a shadow, smooth and unhurried. She pretended to be surprised when he greeted her. "You have been quiet," he said, his deep voice rolling over her like smoke. Naima met his gaze. "So have you." Django smiled, slow and knowing. "I was waiting," he said, "for you to miss me." Naima let out a soft chuckle, just enough to feed his ego. Django leaned closer. "Walk with me." She hesitated, just enough to make it seem real. Then she nodded. He led her toward his hut, his hand brushing against hers. The secret weapon. Naima was ready. Before leaving her aunt's home that evening, she had taken a sacred amulet, given to her by an elder woman of the village. It was small and unassuming, hidden beneath the folds of her dress. But it was powerful. It was said to expose evil spirits, to force them to reveal their true form. Naima had come prepared. But so had Django. The calm before the storm. Django's hut was on the edge of the village, nestled between thick trees. A place away from prying eyes. The moon cast silver light through the cracks in the wooden walls. Inside, the air was warm, scented with burning incense. Django moved with ease, offering her a seat, pouring her palm wine with steady hands. "You intrigue me, Naima," he said. "You are not like the others." Naima smiled faintly. "Perhaps I see the world differently." Django sat across from her, watching her closely. His voice dropped lower. "Do you know the difference between a man's strength and a serpent's power?" Naima's skin prickled. This was it. The question he had asked all the women before her. The last words they had heard before they disappeared forever. She took a slow breath. Steady. Controlled. Before she could answer, Django whistled. The transformation. The sound hung in the air, thin and sharp, like a whisper on the wind. Something in the room shifted. The warm air turned cold. The shadows grew darker. Naima's heart pounded, but she held her ground. Then, from the corners of the hut, something moved. A hiss. A slow, deliberate slither. Naima's breath caught in her throat. A snake, thick, black, and unnatural, emerged from the darkness, its body moving without sound. But it was not alone. From beneath Django's robes, from within his very body, another serpent coiled free. It was not just a snake. It was a part of him. The truth she had suspected all along was now before her. Django was not human. And Naima was in the lair of the beast. The moment of truth. Django watched her reaction, waiting for the fear. Waiting for the surrender. Waiting for her to be like all the others. But Naima did not move. She did not scream. She did not tremble. Instead, she reached beneath her dress, her fingers brushing against the sacred amulet. Django's eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. The air thickened. The snake coiled tighter, sensing something it did not understand. And then, Naima spoke. "You are not a man," she whispered. Django's expression changed. Gone was the charming smile, the playful arrogance. In its place was cold rage. And for the first time, Django looked afraid. The battle was about to begin. Naima's grip tightened around the amulet. Django's serpents hissed, their glowing eyes locked on her. The air crackled with unseen energy. She knew that if she failed now, she would die. Django knew it too. His voice dropped into something inhuman. "You should have never come here, Naima." Naima's eyes hardened. "You should have never taken my sister." Django froze. And that was the last moment of stillness before the storm came. The beast he hid. The face of the monster. Naima did not scream. Her breath hitched, her pulse pounded, but she did not let fear paralyze her. She had come here expecting darkness. But not this. From Django's chest, the thing slithered free, a monstrous black serpent, its scales glistening under the dim firelight. It was not like any snake she had seen before. Its body was too large, its eyes glowed like embers, and the hiss that escaped its mouth carried a sound that was almost human. It was not a pet. Not a creature he controlled. It was him. An extension of his soul. His curse. And it was hungry. The curse of Django. Django's body shifted, his once perfect form warping as the serpent grew larger. His voice, once smooth and rich like honey, now carried an inhuman echo. You should have left, Naima. His words twisted in the air, layered, as though many voices spoke from his mouth at once. You should have forgotten your sister. The serpent coiled around him, its head rising beside his, fangs dripping with unseen venom. This is what I am, Django continued. This is what I have always been. Naima clenched her fist, feeling the sacred amulet burning hot against her skin. She had suspected Django was a demon, a creature of darkness. But now, as she stood face to face with him, she understood the depth of his evil. You feed on them, she said, her voice low, steady. Django smiled. They give themselves to me willingly, he said, his inhuman eyes flickering with amusement. They are drawn to my charm, to my touch. They seek love, pleasure, and I give them exactly that. His lips curled, revealing teeth sharper than they had been before. And when they have given me everything, I take the rest. Naima's stomach tightened. Django had never just seduced women. He had fed on them. Their energy. Their life force. And her sister, Safina, had been one of them. Naima's grip on the amulet tightened. She would not be the next. The serpent's grip. The snake moved first. It struck out faster than Naima had expected, its thick body wrapping around her in an instant. She gasped, her ribs tightening under its powerful coil. The room darkened, the firelight flickering wildly as Django's presence filled every corner of the hut. He stepped forward, watching her struggle, his smile widening. They all fight at first, he murmured, his glowing eyes drinking in the sight of her. But they always. No. Naima's voice cut through the air like a blade. Django's grin faltered. The snake hesitated. And Naima knew this was her moment. A power older than his. Naima ignored the crushing pain in her chest. She raised her amulet, pressing it against the snake's scaled skin. Her lips moved quickly, whispering an incantation in the ancient tongue of her ancestors. Words of protection. Of binding. Words that no demon could ignore. The snake shuddered. For the first time, Django's expression twisted into something other than amusement. Fear. No, he growled, his voice distorted, his body tensing. Naima's chant grew stronger, the amulet now glowing with an eerie white light. The snake convulsed, its massive body loosening its grip on her just slightly. Django staggered back, his form flickering between human and something else. Something wrong. Something unholy. You should not have come here, he rasped, his voice broken between anger and pain. Naima forced herself to stand taller, even as her body ached from the serpent's hold. You killed my sister. Django's breathing turned ragged. The glow of his eyes dimmed. You took Safina, she said, her voice now steady, filled with power. And I will make sure you take no one else. Django snarled, the last remnants of his human mask slipping away. Then I will take you instead. And he attacked. The demon's fury. Django moved too fast, a blur of shadows and coiling darkness. Naima barely dodged, rolling away as his clawed hand slashed through the air where she had stood. The snake lunged again, but she was ready this time. She pressed the amulet into its flesh, and the serpent screamed. Not hissed. Screamed. A sound not meant for human ears, a mix of pain and rage that rattled the walls of the hut. Django clutched his chest as if he felt the burn too. Naima saw her opening. She stepped forward, unafraid. "You were never powerful, Django," she said, her voice ringing through the hut. "You only preyed on those who trusted you." She pressed the amulet against his skin. The glow intensified. Django let out a snarl of pure agony. The snake thrashed, trying to retreat, but it was bound to him. He was weakening. Naima's lips curled into a whisper. She knew the final words. The words that would end him. But before she could speak, Django let out a furious cry and lashed out one last time. A final strike. The attack came too fast to block. Naima felt a sharp pain across her shoulder as she was thrown backward, slamming against the wooden wall. Her vision blurred. Django was panting now, his form half man, half shadow, his body flickering like a dying flame. But he was still standing. Still dangerous. Naima's hand trembled as she reached for her amulet. She had weakened him, but she hadn't finished him. Django wiped dark blood from his lips and let out a ragged, inhuman laugh. "You fight well," he rasped. "But I have lived 100 lifetimes, Naima." His teeth gleamed, his monstrous form towering over her. "And I will live another 100 once you're gone." Naima forced herself to stand. Her body ached. Her heart pounded. But she was not finished. Not yet. She gripped the amulet, its glow flickering but still alive. Django prepared for the final strike. And so did she. One of them would not leave this hut alive, the end of the curse. The final battle. The air inside the hut crackled with energy, thick with the weight of old magic and unspeakable evil. Django, his monstrous form barely holding together, let out a low, guttural snarl. His once perfect skin now flickered between human and something demonic, his body torn between worlds. The serpent coiled tighter around him, its burning red eyes locked on Naima. It hissed in fury, fangs glistening, ready to strike. Naima did not move. She stood her ground, clutching the sacred amulet, her breath slow and steady. She had come too far to fail now. Django lunged. The serpent shot forward, its mouth wide open, venom glistening on its fangs. Naima reacted in an instant. She thrust the amulet forward, and as it met the serpent's skin, a blinding light erupted. The power of the fallen. Django screamed. The snake reeled back, its body convulsing, as if the light had seared through its very essence. The entire hut shook, dust and debris raining down as the power of the curse collided with the power of Naima's ancestors. Naima felt the shift. She had weakened him. But it wasn't enough. She needed more. So she called upon the spirits of the women he had taken. She summoned the dead. Her voice rose, strong and commanding, her chant flowing in the ancient tongue of her people. "Spirits of the lost, rise. Come forth and claim your justice." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air grew cold. The fire flickered violently, then died out completely. A new presence filled the hut. Soft, sorrowful whispers began to swirl around them. Then they appeared. The spirits of the damned. One by one, ghostly figures materialized in the shadows. The women Django had taken. Their faces were pale, their eyes filled with endless grief. Safina was among them. Naima's chest tightened at the sight of her sister. The spirits moved toward Django, their voices rising in a sorrowful, haunting wail. Django staggered back, his once confident face twisting in terror. "No," he rasped, shaking his head violently. "You belong to me. You all belong to me." But the spirits did not listen. They reached for him, their cold, spectral hands latching onto his body. Django let out a horrific scream as their touch burned him, their pain and suffering transferring into him. His skin blackened, his body convulsed. The snake thrashed wildly, trying to pull away, but it was bound to him. Bound to his suffering. The spirits dragged Django to his knees, their whispers turning into a chorus of vengeance. Naima stepped forward. She looked Django in the eyes. And she spoke the words that would end him. You will never hurt another woman again. The breaking of the curse. Django's screams pierced the night. His body began to dissolve, his curse form unraveling under the weight of the spirit's retribution. The snake let out a final, agonized hiss, its body writhing before collapsing lifelessly. Django's face twisted in pure terror as his very essence began to turn to ash. His voice was no longer smooth, no longer enchanting. It was raw. Broken. Please, he choked out. But Naima had no mercy left to give. With one final chant, she sealed his fate. A rush of energy exploded from the amulet, and Django's body disintegrated, turning into nothing more than a cloud of black dust. The serpent crumbled beside him, its power vanishing with its master. And then, silence. The curse was broken. The aftermath. The spirits lingered, their sorrowful faces now at peace. Safina's ghost looked at Naima with soft, grateful eyes. Naima's throat tightened. Rest now, my sister. Safina nodded. And then, with one final, gentle whisper, they faded into the night. Naima stood alone in the ruined hut, the amulet still glowing faintly in her palm. Django was gone. The terror that had haunted Oritu was over. The monster had been destroyed. And the women of the village were finally free. They returned to the village. By dawn, the entire village knew. When Naima stepped into the village square, her clothes torn, her body bruised but unbroken, the people gathered in silent awe. Chief Mosi stepped forward. It is done. Naima nodded. Django will never take another soul. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, a woman wept. A mother clutched her daughter, knowing she would never suffer the fate of the others. The people of Oritu bowed their heads in respect. Naima was no longer just a visitor. She was a legend. And from that day on, the story of Django and the serpent curse would be told for generations. Not as a warning of fear, but as a tale of a woman's strength, a sister's love, and the victory of light over darkness. The end. Rocket.